for a video they did on NFP and NAPRO. And I'll explain all this in a bit, but there's a segment of it that actually was Father Luke and myself and our NFP teachers here being interviewed, and we thought this would be a good way to start. I'm hoping the audio works.
I've been the NFP coordinator for my parish, which is St. Thomas Aquinas University Parish in Charlottesville, since about 1997. I've been their main NFP teacher over those years, and then over the years from there, I actually have trained other teachers in teaching symptothermal method. I think it was always interesting to the priests there, particularly to the current pastor, Father Luke Clark, that we have a doctor who is really invested in NFP. If he was telling people that, you need to be able to seek out these moral ways of approaching women's health, he needed to try to help provide it.
When I arrived here, I was very impressed by the structures that we had set up with Natural Family Planning. Dr. Aaron Portelis had done a lot of work in establishing a ministry. Basically, we had a twofold system where talks were given with regards to natural family planning that were witness talks. And then there were presentations that were given that actually taught the method. As I reflected on the system that we had, I thought there was a little bit of inconsistency, that an option was given with regards to these two areas. And I thought that what should happen is that we should basically have one system where people were taught the method. So we changed it. We made it that everyone had to actually be taught the method.
Father Luke had commented that if we're telling couples that they should be using NFP, he felt like it wasn't fair having them get married through our parish without giving them the tools to meet that teaching.
We take the church's teaching on this very seriously. And we see that this teaching is of service to women and to families. The church is not teaching a set of no's. The church is teaching a set of yeses.
NFP is different from contraception in that any given act of marital relations between the couple is not blocked by a pill or by a condom or by some other mechanism from achieving the possibility of achieving pregnancy. The marital act needs to be both unitive and procreative, according to Humana Vitae. Unitive in that it bonds the couple together, procreative in that the act needs to be open to the possibility of transmitting life. Contraception is basically putting in a barrier or putting in a hormone to say no to God. In other words, we're having this act that should be open to life, but no, you are not welcome to move here. If a couple is trying to avoid pregnancy, the couples are engaging in intercourse at a time when, by the cycle, they believe that pregnancy would likely not result. But they are not putting anything in the way of that act to say no to God if you were choosing to bring forth a life in that cycle. Modern methods of NFP not only look at the history of the cycles, but look prospectively at the cycle the woman is in, and using different signs can tell about the fertility in the cycle in which she is in right now. We don't have 100% control. No method of family planning gives you 100% control. I have seen tubal sterilizations fail, vasectomies have failed. So any woman who thinks that she has found the 100% foolproof method of family planning with any method of family planning is mistaken.
My name is Laurie Tamburino. I'm an NFP instructor here at St. Thomas Aquinas. I've been teaching for almost 5 years.
I'm Patty Strunk, and my husband Tom and I teach the symptothermal method that is promoted by the Couple to Couple League in Cincinnati, Ohio.
So we teach to engaged couples, mostly. Occasionally I have a married couple that's considered for a refresher course, or that moved into the area and they were previously not required to take NFP.
Well, we learned NFP right before we got married. It was highly encouraged by the priest who was preparing us for marriage.
A lot of couples teach that the wife has been on the pill for a decade or more, and she'll say, wow, I'm better on feeling off the pill, or, thank you so much, we have a sex life again.
I think that couples experience empowerment and more of a gaining of knowledge after they understand more of
and that it really contributes to the intimacy. It's very freeing. It's very freeing.
I have my tennis support here. Because I'm doing this thing. I'm still trying to figure out how to go. It's only been a year. I'll still... Okay. Alrighty. So basically what we are here to talk about this evening, I saw Father Jerome's email to everybody, is probably one of the more challenging classes you all are going to face during your time in our CIA. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to present on it because I think there's probably more misconceptions about what this teaching is than what the truth is, and our mission is to kind of explain to you the truth about it so that you understand why the church asks what she does in marital sexuality and why it actually makes sense and why it's really good for women. First of all, everybody has to throw their picture. These are my sons. This actually was last Saturday, and I saw somebody with a JMU sweatshirt. Do you know what building that's in? Yeah.
I can't guess.
Forbes Center. My son had we have a mission to have our children hit every one of the major universities in Virginia except for that one in Blacksburg. So Anthony is a senior at JMU in music ed. Daniel is a second year here in nursing. Patrick just learned that he has been accepted to the College of William and Mary for next year. Stephen is waiting to hear from JMU, UVA, and Mason. So, basically part of this is just I think a lot of times the conception, I know when we were learning NFP, was that most couples we saw using NFP were had 10 kids. And a lot of them were homeschooling, and when I first heard about this and saw somebody come in with 4 scapulars and her kids were all being homeschooled in Latin, I thought, I'm out of here, I can't do this. I love homeschoolers, don't get me wrong. I also think people who are called to large families, that's awesome. God calls us to generosity. But I think people do need to realize that this teaching can work and that couples who feel called to smaller families can actually still pull this off. And we cheated because Stephen and Patrick were twins. So, so we got to 4 kids cheating, if you call it that, I guess. And I'm in the Dominican laity. So yes, it's all about truth, veritas, and I'm hoping we push that tonight so that you guys get to see why this teaching is. As Father Luke referenced in the video, this is not more a thou shalt not or no's. We're trying to have you be open to a bigger yes. This is a quote from Dignitas Personae, which was an encyclical, that behind behind the no you can't use contraception, there is a bigger yes. The yes being, what are we open to by accepting this teaching? And everyone has their own conversion story. I actually am a cradle Catholic. I was baptized when I was 12 days old. But my conversion was to this teaching, and it actually occurred in 1995. This is St. John Paul II. I'm from Baltimore. He came to Baltimore for a visit, and I was up in Baltimore for a wedding at that time. So we decided to go and take our 2 sons at that point, including one who was 4 months old, because we were convinced that Daniel would somehow remember seeing the Pope. No, he doesn't. Neither does the one who was 2 and a half, for that matter. But what happened when we were up there, we didn't have tickets for the Mass in Camden Yards, but we were able to go to anyone could go along the parade route. So the Pope was going down the streets in the Pope-mobile. While we were walking around beforehand, there was this big sign on one of the buildings people were holding up, and it said, Holy Father, we are entirely in agreement with your teachings. I read that and I'm like, because a couple months prior to that when we were in Pennsylvania, we lived in Pennsylvania at the time. I had opened up a parish bulletin you know, you get into Mass and you shouldn't be looking at the bulletin, but you do anyway. And I was looking at the bulletin, and there was this insert from Priests for Life. And I really considered myself pro-life. I was in the pro-life group in my high school, and I was pro-life in med school, so I thought, oh, this is cool. So I start looking at it, and it asked you to pray for doctors who prescribed contraception, because it could cause a pregnancy loss, it could cause an early abortion. And I thought, I read that and thought, well, okay, this poor priest is a little mistaken, and our pastor is a little more mistaken for sticking it in, and I'm just going to ignore it. I kind of felt tweaked, but I kind of kept shoving it aside. Then we go to Baltimore, and I see this big banner on one of the buildings on Charles Street, and I thought, okay, God, are you trying to tell me something? A couple weeks later, and this is going to sound that stupid, and I'm not somebody who lives on a dime when I'm making big decisions. A couple weeks later, I honestly felt called to look at what we were using in our marriage. We were using barrier contraception at the time. And also, within 6 months of that, actually felt called to stop prescribing contraception in my medical practice. And that was huge. I'm a family physician. I have a practice in Charlottesville. For a family doctor to stop prescribing the pill is kind of like cutting your arm off and still trying to practice. Very few, there were maybe like 200 or 300 docs in the entire United States who were doing it. I was fortunate to have contact with a few of them so that I could figure out if you were going to do this, how even would you? And that was in 1995, 96, and yes, I'm still standing almost 20 years later, so it worked. But just so that there are a lot of Catholics you will worship with here who are still struggling with this teaching. So everyone has his or her own conversion story and when they come to it. You guys are fortunate in that you're getting to hear about it early in your journey to becoming Catholics, because you'll understand it a little better probably than a lot of the people you're with in the church. This was a poll after John Paul II died, basically what do Catholics want from the next Pope? And Father Jerome's email had said that this is the one teaching that's the red flag, and all of you have to talk to him and ask him what you have questions about. Well, you're not alone. 78% said that they really wanted the Pope to change the position on birth control, and that was in 2005. We're almost 10 years later, it's not changing, and it's not going to. And why is that a good thing? Chastity, everyone thinks about chastity in the terms of the clergy. You know, poverty, chastity, obedience, the promises that a priest takes or that a sister takes. Chastity is actually not just for those who are called to be celibates. It's a teaching for all of us. There is a celibacy appropriate to those in the single life. There is a celibacy appropriate to those in the religious life. And there is a celibacy for those in the married life. And basically that call is to love as God loves, that God gave himself entirely for us. There's the crucifix. We have the sign of it anywhere we look. We are called to be that for our spouses, to give yourself entirely to your spouse gives himself entirely to you. So if we're looking at that, then you can say, well, why does NFP do that better than contraception does? We're going to kind of take a little trip here. So we're looking at fertility. And fertility, it's so good. I mean, generally, when I work with women in my practice, women who are infertile consider that to be a problem. That's a medical problem diagnosis. So fertility is a good. We're cooperating with God's act in creation, bearing and educating children. For those who are maybe have infertility and cannot have children of their own, like adopting children or other works of service. We're all called to help bring forward the next generation in one way or another. St. Augustine talked about the 3 goods of marriage, that fidelity, which is faithfulness, permanence, that the vows are made, until death do us part, and openness to life. And actually, when couples are getting married in the Catholic Church, one of the promises they make at the altar is to lovingly accept children from God. So if a couple were to go into a sacramental marriage with the intent of not having children, that's not saying they may have infertility, but literally we're going into marriage saying we don't want to have children, we'll just we'll have puppies and we'll, take the dogs for a walk in the park. If a couple goes into it with the intent of intentionally not having children in their marriage, that's actually grounds for annulment of the marriage. So just so that it's that serious. And this was alluded to in the little video clip. The two important things to remember about the marital act or intercourse, it's unitive in that it brings the couple together, and it's procreative. That means it has the potential to be life-giving and to transmit life. It doesn't mean that every act of intercourse obviously needs to result in a baby. People ask me that, and no, it just has to be open to the possibility. Okay, now.
Hi, I'm a contraception, and I'm natural family planning. We pretty much do the same thing. Actually, we're really opposite. No, we don't stop unwanted pregnancies. Well, my users are open to life. They simply abstain when they have a good reason. My users can get sex whenever they want it. So do mine. Well, mine's free. Well, mine's free about fertility altering chemicals. Ooh. Or they even take the pills in the right order. Or that your wife might get a bit testy from hormone manipulation. Ooh. Or that your libido would decrease. Ooh. Well, my users don't have to talk about when to have sex. So your users don't talk to each other much. So I just think that talking is a plus in a relationship. Well, we all have different values. Then I guess we don't do the same thing. Guess not.
Oh, we're past the candy round because I forgot it. I hope everybody gave up candy for Advent. I usually do this talk in Lent and I pass out candy and people start. Okay, I am going to ask you though, take a couple pieces. Oh, well, you can just let pass the basket, pass the paper. Yeah. Or else you keep taking it. Actually, the roast is on. That's okay. I would ask them that when you take it, don't open it yet. I promise you I will let you eat it, but just don't open it right now. It's an object point, so you're going, she's crazy. I get it. Okay. Okay. Maintaining the fullness of sex for the marital act. So when we talk about unitive and procreative, they need to be together. You cannot have one without the other. So you cannot have baby, when we talk about babies and bonding, so babies being the procreative and bonding being the unitive. So you can't have bonding without babies, so in other words, engaging in the marital act without being open to the possibility of life, and you cannot have babies without bonding, in other words, things that separate procreation from the marital act. And here we're talking about things like in vitro fertilization or such. So, or artificial insemination. In other words, babies need to be conceived within the active intercourse of their parents. That does not preclude treatment for infertility, and I'll get into that a bit later. Okay. We're going to look a bit at natural law. Okay. Anyone who is not Dominican, do you know who's in the picture here? Very good. You can take 2 pieces when it comes around. Take it 2. St. Thomas Aquinas, when we look at natural law, natural law is not the exclusive property of Catholics, although many people appropriately, when they think of natural law, think of Aquinas because he was very, he expounded upon it a lot in his writings, and that's where most of us understand it from. So when you're looking at natural law is basically saying that we were made a certain way for a reason, certain things, God has given us a basic understanding of how things work. Okay, you guys, most of you have cars, right? If you have a car, you are free to put honey in the gas tank if you want to. There's no law stopping you from doing that. But cars don't run on honey. So you're free to do it, but the car's not going to act like a car very much anymore. So, in other words, certain things are just kind of intuitively known to us that this is right and this is wrong. So, natural law is not the exclusive property of Catholics. It goes back to ancient Greece. St. Thomas Aquinas certainly gave the most systematic explanation of it. When I was in undergrad, I did my undergrad at Towson State up in Maryland. Now it's called Towson, they took the state off. I took a biomedical ethics course, and we were taught that natural law was this kind of cute, antiquated little Catholic thing that no one pays attention to anymore. And I kind of bought it because I didn't know any better, and then I was kind of like, you start learning it later and you go, oh, okay, wow, this actually does make sense. And natural law is intuitive enough that actually Martin Luther King mentioned natural law and Aquinas in a letter from the Birmingham jail when he was in prison during the Civil Rights Movement. So it's not just a Catholic thing. In natural law, there are several levels of the teaching. The very most basic is do good, avoid evil. However, we are fallen creatures, and how that exactly plays out in our being able to take the good, do good and avoid evil and apply it to circumstances in life gets a little complicated. So we have more levels to be able to help parse that out. Next is the Ten Commandments, the set of, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. And then when you get past that, it's more specifically things that are brought out by study. And when you look at the teaching authority of the church, the magisterium, part of that is to look at taking natural law, what is God asking of us, and bringing it down to the very practical, what do we need to do in this or that situation. Does that make sense? Everybody has certain things we reach for as members of Homo sapiens, human beings. First of all, we all intrinsically seek good. We may not agree exactly on how to get there. We want to preserve ourselves. We want to preserve our own life as a natural instinct. We want to, generally, we are made to live in groups. And that to note, we want to preserve the species. In other words, if we don't reproduce, we will be the end of the story. Also, to know the truth and be able to make decisions on our own. Okay, does everybody have the candy yet? Oh, no. Has it gotten around everybody? Okay.
It needs to go forward.
Oh, it needs to move forward, okay. When I see it come back to you, I'm going to realize. So how does natural law apply to contraception? Our desire to preserve life is a good. We have feelings. We get hungry, we get tired, we get thirsty. We have sexual attraction. They all help us to achieve certain things that we need to do in order to survive. We need to eat in order to survive, so hunger is a natural instinct. We need to drink fluids, thirst is one. We need rest, sleep is one. We need to keep the species going. So the sexual attraction is actually there for a good reason, because we need to be engaged in intercourse in order to have the next generation come. So the sexual drive is a good. There's this really common misconception that the church is anti-sex. That's really not true. Sex is a good, our bodies are a good, to believe otherwise is a heresy. So everybody has now gotten the candy, right? Okay, you all have that, this is the natural law explanation before we leave this topic. So you all have the candy. You could pop the candy in your mouth with the wrapper on it because you were free to do so. Do you want to? No, it's gross. Somebody also would say, wow, you like talking about condoms and like wrappings and candies, but I'm like, we don't have to go there. But natural law, like, you are free to eat the candy however you want, but I would advise you to take off the wrapper first. So feel free to enjoy it. There's a ton left over, so feel free to rate it later. I'll put it on the table when you guys are free. Okay, so we have a lot of candy. We have the ability, we have the privilege to participate in natural law. It's our choice to do so. How we fulfill the drives we are given is a choice we make, though. Animals are instinctive. Animals don't, they eat, sleep, reproduce without having to make active decisions about it. We have the privilege of making decisions, but also the responsibility for the decisions we make. Another view of looking at why the church's teachings on contraception are what they are is a theology of the body. Have any of you heard of that? St. John Paul II, when he became Pope, had a series of 130 of his Wednesday audiences looking at of marriage and human sexuality. Man is made in the image and likeness of God. Like I said before, the body is a good, sex is a good. We don't believe otherwise. I love this next quote that Gaudium et Spes, it's a Vatican II document. Man is love's origin, vocation, and end. He cannot fully find himself except through the sincere gift of himself. From that, John Paul II drew the analogy that as Christ fully gave himself for the church, look up there, as he fully gave himself to the church, spouses are fully called to give themselves to each other. So, total self-giving. The marital act should reflect that. When a couple is using contraception in a marriage act, basically the husband is saying to the wife, I accept all of you except that part of you that could be fertile right now. So here, you need to do a pill or a shot or get your tubes tied or something so that that part of, I'll accept all of you except the part that might give us a baby right now. Conversely, a condom or a vasectomy would say the same thing the wife is saying to the husband. I'll take all of you except the part of you that's fertile right now. That is what John Paul II called lying, L-Y-I-N-G, with the body. That, in other words, what you are promising each other and what you promised each other at the altar when you got married, you're not exactly carrying that truth into your bedroom because you promised to take the whole person and you're kind of taking the parts you want. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I guess you all had that as a reading assignment. Did everyone look at it? And Father Jerome's not in the room, so I'm not going to report. There are quotes in here, and you would have seen these in the segments he had you read, that the acts of marriage are honorable, that refusing fertility turns married life away from children, which are the gift of marriage. And that's another quote, again, lifted from a Vatican II document. Here's an important one here, that this is where the natural family planning NFP part comes in. Methods of family planning that look at when a woman is fertile and when she is not and use those appropriately are in conformity with morality. In other words, and we're going to get more into the why later, but when people say, oh, NFP is just Catholic contraception, it's really not. And we're going to get into the explanation of why it's different. But you may even find people who will say, well, if you really want to let God plan your family, you shouldn't be charting or doing anything. Let God plan your family and you're not trusting Him enough. That's not what the church is saying either. So my mission is to tell you that the answer is not on either end. The answer is in the middle. This was referenced in the video, Humana Vitae. It's kind of, for people who work with NFP, is kind of considered the highlight point of our history. It was 1968. Pope Paul VI. Give you context on this. The birth control pill came out in the late 1950s or early 1960s. The church had a teaching against contraception. So did a lot of churches. We'll get to that. But anyway, basically, everyone was looking to the church to see, and to the Pope to see if he would make a move to finally acknowledge that this birth control pill that had just come out was okay. It was actually developed by a Catholic, so people were kind of wondering where the answer was going to lie here. I was 5 at the time, so to say that I remember what the response was is not true. But apparently the response was rather nuclear because everyone expected him to come out and say that the pill was going to be fine. And when he released this document, he basically released a firestorm. Bishops publicly went into secular newspapers and signed letters of dissent against it in the United States. Bishops were asked to join groups against it all around the world. Bishops' conferences in Europe came out openly against it and said, we think there was a mistake here. Pope Paul VI didn't back down. And I'm going to explain what the teachings were in there and kind of, as you see how things played out, that actually he made the right move. It was a really difficult move. So he mentioned the part that we talked about, that the marital act is unitive and procreative. He talked about a concept of responsible parenthood, and that's a really important one when I'm teaching couples NFP or when I'm talking about it in other groups. Responsible parenthood means that you have to look at your responsibilities to God, to yourselves as a couple, to your family, and to society, and order things in context of that. So you can consider physical, economic, psychological, and social factors if you're looking at the decision at a given point on whether you were called to achieve or postpone a pregnancy. He gave a couple predictions in there if contraception were to be accepted. This was 1968, okay? And you can read these. I'll be perfectly honest with you, if I was old enough in 1968 to have thought about it, I would have thought that he was off base, that, you know, if women can control when they have their children, marriages should be happier because you're not going to be stressed out by too many kids. Women will be better off because they can finish their training for their careers uninterrupted by an unexpected pregnancy. Women should be more respected. There should be fewer abortions because there are fewer unplanned pregnancies because you should be able to use this to plan them. And basically, if you look at that from 1968 and people laughed at him and look at where we are right now, we're not that far off. I mean, abortion rates are higher, divorce rates are higher. There is forced family planning in China and in the third world. There's a lot going on that he called in this document back in 1968. People will talk about, when you learn about the Pope, I'm not sure if you've gotten there yet, but that when the Pope is infallible or when he is not, but also that we believe that the Holy Father has been given by the Holy Spirit the ability to help guide us in teachings. And I think if you want to look at the papacy being prophetic or him using the guidance of the Holy Spirit to move us forward, look at this document and what he did back then, and I think you really have to look. It took my breath away once I really read it. Okay, since this is RCIA, many of you are coming here either maybe been baptized in another faith tradition or non-baptized at all. I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear what was going on in some of your church backgrounds as recently as 1930. In the Old and New Testament, there are references, not specifically to contraception. You know, you get the, where is that in the Bible? There does not say anywhere, thou shalt not contracept. So don't go looking for it, I promise you won't find it. Genesis, one of the first commands God made to man was be fruitful and multiply. If you look in Galatians and Revelation, St. Paul refers to pharmakia, which I have read when translated comes into things like potions that were used for abortions or were used for contraceptions. There were contraceptives available way before the birth control pill. When I teach women how to teach NFP, you're teaching them the history of things like about using camel skins as as condoms back then, or actually the first IUDs were stones that were put into the uterus of camels so that they didn't get pregnant going across the desert. It's true. So contraceptives have been available for a long while, and even back to the days in the New Testament, St. Paul, he was kind of gently speaking out against that idea, but it doesn't say contraception per se. But biblical scholars have said pharmakia includes things like that. If you're a biblical scholar, I'll let you argue that out. Martin Luther, for those of you who may be Lutheran, felt that, it was quoted that the purpose of marriage was to procreate and bring up children. Gandhi, the sex urge is for the act of creation. Any other use is a use against God and humanity. The turning point on this is 1930. Lambeth is a every 10-year conference in the Anglican Church. And